like to bring up and talk about just like the mechanics of trading something when a news item like the awful storms that are affecting the East Coast and also down in Louisiana and everything else. Hopefully everybody's doing well and recovering well from all of that. But this is always an interesting point. Unfortunately, every year around this time, storm season comes along, but also one-off news items having to do with weather or events that can occur in any country across the globe that affect commodities like crude oil or gold or other energy sources and metals and what have you. I like to bring up the idea, talk about the potential opportunity for speculating and hedging around these news items, and try to instill with people, if you are going to go from news item to market to try to speculate on something or hedge something, what mechanics can we set up here? I mean, what is in your head? We're going to use crude oil for today, but maybe an example of something that you go from the news to the market in Jermal. Do you have anything that's kind of ringing a bell in recent trade outside of what we're talking about today, which is oil?
Yeah, no, I mean, I like this topic where we're going, but to answer your question, I could just go with something today. I mean, I think just about a little over an hour and a half ago, they came out with some news about Apple having an event on the 14th, right? So I'm pretty sure there's been a ton of call buyers in the last several hours, anticipating whatever they're going to talk about. I don't know if they're going to talk about a new iPhone or whatever, but whatever it is, a new product, it doesn't matter. It's Apple and people want it. And so, that's a perfect example, because as soon as that headline came out, I'm sure people went ahead and gobbled up some calls.
That's a great example there. And, we are talking about the oil market relative to all of the storm news from the last week or so, really hitting hard midway through last week. But yeah, Apple and an event like teasing a new product. And I'm glad that you brought up what the knee-jerk reaction is among the public, because I would contend with anything that is news oriented and less kind of fundamental. I like to put those into two separate buckets, which is like news and stuff that's short term versus fundamental. And like fundamental would be like inflationary news, or like last week's non-farm payrolls, or when the Fed comes out and says like, this is what we're going to do. That's something where markets are going to move, but it maybe doesn't present short-term opportunity. Whereas something in the news, there is a knee-jerk reaction, like you say with Apple, where it's like, oh, they announced an event where they're going to be announcing, I'm sure, some very cool stuff. And the knee-jerk reaction amongst the public is like, get long, get long, get long. So you might see some call buying, you might see some share buying, and what have you. Same with this idea of oil last week and coming into this week now, as some of the storm fear hopefully cools a little bit. Here on Tuesday, the knee-jerk reaction when something like this occurs, Jermal, is like, oh, well, I need to go in there, and with oil news here, like, oh, the supply is going to get messed up, and so prices are going to skyrocket, so I need to buy. But this usually ends up being a little bit of a short-term type mentality. Looking at Thursday of last week, sure, the growing fear can result in large moves, but they tend to dissipate rather quickly. I mean, last week, I guess you could say, we saw a run-up in crude oil well north of $70. I mean, were you following this story at all?
I definitely was. I got to say, you nailed it. Even with the previous slides, looking at those headlines from, that was Monday and Tuesday, but it was starting Sunday night. As soon as this thing was hitting, I was seeing a lot of, tweets and a lot of news talking about how, this may affect supply. Every little tick that oil had onto the upside, they were talking about it. Oil's already up, 0.005%. You know what I mean? Like it was a little excessive, if you will. But people were anticipating a trading opportunity. There's no doubt about it. And oil did run up into 70. And I'll be honest, like I got interested once it hit that upper resistance area. It hit the 50-day. And so that's where I took a chance to take a shot. Now, as a result of the chart, as you see, and this was literally on this, it was the second. I think it was the second when it hit like 70, 40. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of interested here. Let's see what happens. And as a result, it has, tailed off as this some of the news has subsided a little bit, but there's still a lot of talk out there about this idea of, I think I saw something recently that 80% of the supply is cut off as of right now. So, sure. Or U.S. supply, I should say, or something like that. But I didn't even trade it because of that. I traded because of what I saw on the chart.
Yeah, and so you're speaking more to like a long-term mentality where crude oil maybe gets back to, 73, 75, where it's been recently in the coming weeks. But on the short-term basis here, when you see a news item run a market up like this, and, you say to yourself, like, hopefully from just a human perspective, but also from like a market perspective, like, what does this mean for crude oil in the next several hours? Well, there's a lot of fear in there, but like not much has changed for this billions dollar industry here for the short term that would cause this market to move up multiple percentage points, multiple dollars per barrel. And that's when you see that sell off, the large reversal. And of course, there are plenty of news events that are more focused in equities. Some pessimistic sentiment comes out over the weekend and equity markets open, 5% lower. And so it's not a matter of, markets always move higher. It's just the idea to me with news items like this and short-term news items like this, especially, is getting on the other side of it as long as nothing fundamental has changed, can usually yield some rewards. And we've seen it in the immediate aftermath of the news items that kind of peaked Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon. And now even as recently as today, crude oil is still kind of giving back some of that fear bid. I mean, does this make sense to you from a news perspective, how it translates to the market and what you might do for short-term opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, those who are interested in that type of trade, I mean, it's there to be had, but the news changes, right? And so, each day, the idea of the news, theoretically, again, if you listen to these things, I don't really listen to it as much. It depends on, there's certain news items that are definitely noteworthy. And then there's others that are, somewhat speculative, if you will. And so the idea that today that oil is dropping because, there's going to be less demand based on the jobs report. I mean, that's one, if you want to buy it, cool. I mean, go right ahead. But it's just a matter of, I guess for me, I'm always looking at, the technicals. I'm really looking at how that's the way that I'm going to trade it. And sometimes you can get fooled because of something like this, right? That the run up because a result of the news that was, the previous week.
And I would say, and you probably know this, and I know this to a lesser extent. I haven't been around trading as often as you, as long as you have here. But you find out, the next question a lot of people have is like, okay, well, how do I know a news item to sell versus a news item to maybe stay away from? And it comes from experience, unfortunately. As long as you follow trading Twitter and trading Reddit, whatever you look at, and then jump from there to markets to see what's happening, you probably aren't going to trade the first news item that you see. But as long as you start looking at those things and then see how markets react, and then look at the next thing, thankfully there's a news item every single day that is moving some market, you'll get a feeling for like what is fleeting and what is fundamental. And something like last week, of course, not fleeting in terms of its after effects and the places that were hit by these storms, but in terms of markets, this is something that we have an annual amount of, annually we have occurrences for this because of storm season that kicks in like this. In the summer going to the fall of every year, where it's like big news, you see a run up in Home Depot prices, Lowe's prices, crude oil prices, and it tends to come back a little bit because it is a fear-based move in there. Now, from experience that something that's more substantial like job numbers or, inflationary or Fed, these people and these data releases that actually affect the future path of markets, that's something you probably want to stay away from just blindly selling or buying into. And then also you don't want to do any of this on a blind basis. And this is the last piece I want to speak to here, because it's a nice, clean story in terms of trading the news over the last week in crude oil. But, this market could have jumped from around $67, $68 a barrel up to 70 and then 75 before finally reversing. And so the question becomes, where will this thing turn around? Thankfully, this time, if you were trading crude oil from the short side, trading this reversal, it was relatively quick and painless. It went from $68 up to 70 and then came back to 68, which is where we sit today. But later on in the week, I want to talk a little bit about mechanics and how you make sure that you, one, maybe don't get in early, and two, if you do get in early, you're not getting taken along for what becomes a medium or long-term ride, because it's not always as easy and clean as it has been this last week in crude oil.
Yeah, no, for sure. This one was relatively quick and painless, like you said, because it's been in that, $2 range or so, or I guess you could say $4, up, down. But it's an interesting thing, this idea of how a news story can sort of take and move a market a little bit, because, like you said, this is a very real situation. We've seen it happen before in the past. Of course, it harkens to the times of September 2005. And we saw, some of the pictures of the devastation down there. We know that that's a big area where, there's a lot of nat gas and a lot of crude oil offshore stuff. So, it very well could have been one of those type of situations. But and if you're trading it for that, that's a tougher trade if you're trading just based off of that news, versus if you're trading the normal way you trade, the normal way you analyze and step into a trade, you'll have a lot more conviction, and as I said, as of right now, even with me getting in there at around 70 spot 4, I'm comfortable with what happened because I have a different outlook versus just these last couple of days, or I'm trading it because of, hurricane season, et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, a good place to conclude today's show, because we will open this up a little bit further for, some actual examples of mechanics and how you can attribute this to. And like I said, there's news items every single day across equities, commodities, and everything else. Because the idea, like you say, is having your mechanics, your outlook, and what you normally do on news or non-news based trades, and apply that to just something that is affected by the news. It's not like a scenario where it's like, oh, I'm trading the news now, and so I need to change everything. No, the news is a lot of times just something that kind of inspires another trade that you would do based on anything else. And so we will get to more mechanics on that. I like where you finished there, Jermal, which is just like, this news item is what got me into this crude oil trade, but I'm going to manage it and look at it in the future, just like I would any other trade. I think that's exactly the way to do it. So we'll get to more mechanics and everything like that around trading the news in the segment later on this week. Thanks so much for joining me here, man. I'm so excited for you, given this last weekend. You're probably going to have a real nice sleep here tonight. It's always tough. We were just talking during the break. Long weekend, awesome. First day coming off of long weekend, way worse than Monday. I mean, am I wrong or what?
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't feel like the Monday. You don't it's not a Monday, so you don't feel like it's, a bad day. It's like, okay, it's Tuesday. We're almost there towards the end of the week. But at the end of the day, it's the first day back and it's a little weird. You're just thrown off.
That's exactly right.
Schedule.
That's exactly. I can deal with a Monday because Monday, the idea is kind of shallow. It's like, oh, it's Monday, this stinks, and I can get over that pretty quickly. Whereas the idea of Tuesday after a long weekend, that is less shallow. That's deep. That's like, man, 3 days. I've gotten on a different schedule, and subconsciously my body and mind is not ready for it. And so a tough Tuesday here, but we're getting through it.
Hey, let's not complain about it too much. We're that much closer to Friday.
Exactly right. That much closer to yet another weekend, but we have a lot of trading to do in the meantime. Jermal, thanks so much for joining me here. We got Splash into Futures coming up next. Peter Momat and I are going to open up the platform and get some stuff going. We got interest rates higher, dollars higher, cryptocurrencies much lower, and plenty of stuff to trade. So stick around, everybody. Thanks, Jermal. Peace.